I used to think the quiet hour before dinner was the safest place in a man's day. The sun laying its last tired light across the kitchen tiles, the soft bubbling of a pot left to simmer, the smell of onions caramelizing like a slow confession. There was a time when that hour meant family, a time when a meal I cooked drew laughter, stories, the sound of my wife humming while she set out a mismatched row of plates because she could never remember where she put anything. Now, the only thing that keeps me company is the ticking of the clock that hangs over the stove. It's crooked. My daughter-in-law bumped it months ago and never straightened it. It leans to the right, as though time itself is tired of watching me. That night, I stirred the pot with a wooden spoon older than my son. The edges were worn smooth from decades of turning soups, gravies, and spices into something comforting. I hadn't cooked in a while, not since the family made jokes about how old people flavors were too heavy. But the house had felt cold lately, and something in me wanted warmth again. I wanted to feel useful, needed, even if just for an hour. My back hurt, but that was nothing new. A pinch in the spine, another in the hip. My body was a map of the life I'd lived. I worked through the aches and added herbs with careful fingers. The steam softened my face, fogged my glasses, and for a heartbeat, I could almost pretend my wife was behind me, telling me to stop fussing with the seasoning because it was already perfect. I smiled at the thought. Then I heard the front door slam. Voices spilled into the hallway, sharp, irritated, exhausted. My son's voice first, low and strained. "I told you I'd handle it." Then my daughter-in-law's, louder, clipped. "You never handle anything. If you had just listened to me earlier." They didn't bother lowering their voices. They rarely did anymore. Their footsteps marched toward the kitchen. I moved aside instinctively, making room, even though I'd been standing there long before they came home. She entered first, eyes already rolled back as though she were mid-complaint. My son followed behind with the grandkids lagging, glued to their screens like little blue light ghosts. "You cooked?" she asked. Not surprise, not gratitude, mild annoyance. "I thought we might all enjoy a warm dinner together," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I sounded timid even to myself. She didn't answer. She lifted the lid, sniffed, shrugged. My son gave a half-hearted smile that didn't reach his eyes. The kids didn't look up at all. They sat. They didn't wait for me. They didn't ask if I needed help. They didn't even ask what I made. They just ate, like wolves at a silent feast. I stood by the counter, watching. I didn't know whether to sit or wait until they were done. In the old days, my wife would have elbowed me and whispered, "Stop hovering, sit." But she wasn't here to guide me back into my own home. So I kept tidying, wiping surfaces that were already clean, folding a towel and unfolding it again, pretending I had something to do until they remembered me. They didn't. I listened to their forks scrape the plates, heard my daughter-in-law complain about her coworkers, my son murmur small apologetic sounds, the kids laugh at something on their phones. Not a single word about the food, not even a nod. The ache in my back spread upward into my chest. Finally, when the pot was empty and the plates were full of crumbs, I stepped toward the table. I forced myself to smile. "Did you all enjoy?" Her chair scraped the floor as she pushed back abruptly, stacking plates on top of each other like she was clearing trash. "Oh, Dad," she said, in that tone she uses when she wants to sound polite but can't hide that she's irritated to her core. "Since you're not busy, can you do the dishes?" Time stopped. Something in the room froze. Maybe it was just me. My hands paused mid-air, one still wrapped around the towel I'd been folding pointlessly. My son didn't look at me. He didn't even blink. He went right back to scrolling through his phone. The grandkids were already wandering toward the living room. Not busy. I had spent all afternoon cooking, carefully, slowly, like it meant something. But apparently that counted as nothing. She dropped the plates into the sink, the clatter echoing like a punch thrown without apology. "Thanks," she added, not turning back. The lights buzzed softly above me. The clock ticked its crooked little tick. And in the distance, my grandson laughed at a video, the kind of laugh kids reserve for strangers online, not family in the room. I walked to the sink. I washed each plate slowly, letting the water run hot enough to sting. The steam fogged my glasses again, but this time it didn't feel warm. It felt choking. I thought of every sacrifice I'd made, every early morning shift, every scraped knee I kissed clean, every dinner I cooked after long days when my wife was too tired, every moment I showed up, without being asked, without being thanked. And here I was, treated as the household dishwasher because I wasn't busy. But I didn't say a word. My silence has always been my shield. I dried the last bowl and set it down gently. Then I looked around the empty kitchen, my kitchen, and something inside me shifted. Not a crack, not a snap, something deeper, a quiet rearranging of old bones and older patience. If they wanted a servant, they would lose a father. They just didn't know it yet. When morning comes in a house where respect has decayed, it doesn't arrive gently. It creeps in through the thin spaces between doors, settles in the corners like dust, and waits for the first footsteps to disturb it. I woke before everyone else, as I usually do. Old men don't sleep much. We rest, then we rise, carried by habit more than restfulness. The house was quiet, but not peaceful. Peace has a softness to it. This silence felt held back, like the walls themselves were waiting for the first argument of the day to give them permission to breathe again. I shuffled toward the kitchen, the early morning light slanting across the floor. My hip groaned at me, the same complaint it's had since the year my wife passed. I pressed a hand to the counter as I steadied myself. There were still crumbs on the table from last night, a piece of rice, a crust from the bread, a fork abandoned under a napkin like someone swatted it away. No one bothered cleaning up after eating the dinner I spent all day preparing. I didn't touch any of it. Not last night's mess, not the leftover pot, not the greasy fingerprints around the sink. I just stood there, palms flat on the counter, staring at the kitchen like a battlefield after everyone else had left with full stomachs and no responsibility. The anger didn't come as fire. It came as a dull heaviness in my ribs, a weight I had carried too long to notice until it pressed hard enough to bruise. My son used to gaze at me like I hung the moon with my bare hands. Now he barely looked at me unless he needed something. My daughter-in-law had once bought me a sweater and told me I was such a blessing. Now she flinched if I opened a cupboard too loudly. Even the grandkids, God bless them, had learned to talk to me as though I required instructions for breathing. Small humiliations, day after day. None big enough to explode over, but each one adding another pebble to the pocket of a drowning man. When the family finally woke, the house shifted from silence to friction. The first voice I heard was my daughter-in-law's. "Did you forget to put the milk back?" she called out sharply, stepping into the kitchen with her phone still in hand. She looked at the table, at the crumbs, at the dirty spot where her children had spilled sauce and let it harden overnight. Then she looked at me, not with curiosity, with expectation. I said nothing. Her eyes narrowed. "I thought you said you'd clean up." I paused, slowly, deliberately. "I didn't say that," I replied. She blinked, offended, like I'd broken an unspoken agreement. "Well," she said, forcing a cheerful tone that didn't fit her tight jaw, "since you're usually up early, I just assumed you'd take care of it." Assumed. They always assumed that I'd cook, clean, watch the kids, stay quiet, stay grateful, stay out of the way. I took a breath and stepped back. "Not this morning," I said. Her lips parted as if I had slapped her with a feather, soft but insulting in its own way. "What do you mean, not this morning?" she asked, her voice rising an octave. "Dad, this house is full of people. We all need to help." I wanted to laugh or cry, or maybe both, but I simply looked at her, holding my spine straight. "I helped yesterday." She scoffed, loud enough so my son, who was walking halfway into the kitchen, heard it. "Helped?" she repeated. You made dinner, and we all have long days, Dad. We can't do everything. My son rubbed his forehead. Can we not start the day with drama? He muttered. Drama? I was drama now. He walked to the fridge, opened it, frowned. Did someone leave the door open last night? His wife turned to him quickly, ready for battle. I didn't. Ask your father. He was up before all of us. My son exhaled slowly, like he was already tired of me, and it wasn't even 8 a.m. Dad, if you open the fridge, please make sure you close it fully. The milk is warm. My jaw tightened. I hadn't touched the fridge. I hadn't touched anything. I had stood here, watching the scraps dry on the table, listening to the house breathe in its own neglect. Yet here I was, the convenient culprit. I didn't open it, I said calmly. He didn't believe me. I saw it in his eyes. That tiny flicker of doubt that says, the old man probably forgot. I used to forget birthdays? No. Anniversaries? Never. My son's favorite bedtime story? I could tell it backward in my sleep. But a refrigerator door? That was apparently beyond me now. Before I could speak again, the grandkids stormed into the kitchen, already complaining. Grandpa, you didn't wash my bowl from last night. I looked at the bowl, sitting near the sink, dry sauce crusted around the edges, a spoon glued in place. I didn't know it was yours, I said quietly. It always is, my grandson snapped, stomping his foot. Now I have to eat cereal in a cup! A cup! He stormed out, leaving his siblings snickering. I inhaled deeply, letting the air fill all the hollow places inside me. Then I spoke the words no one in this house had expected to hear. I will clean my own messes, I said slowly. And that is all. My daughter-in-law froze. My son froze. Even the dog stopped moving. She let out a disbelieving laugh. You're being dramatic, she said again. You live here. You should contribute. I do, I answered plainly. More than you realize. My son tilted his head. What's that supposed to mean? But I didn't answer. I walked past them, leaving the kitchen as it was. Crumbs, spills, dirty bowls, warm milk, and all. Behind me, I heard my daughter-in-law murmur through clenched teeth. He's becoming a problem. A problem. A burden. A chore they'd rather delegate. I walked to my small bedroom and closed the door gently behind me. Sitting on the edge of my bed, I looked at my hands. Calloused, strong, steady, despite everything they've carried. These hands had built a home, a life, a family. And now they washed dishes because I was not busy. But they would learn soon. They would learn exactly what happens when the quiet one in the house finally stands up. There's a particular ache that settles in a man's bones when he realizes he has become invisible in the very home he helped build. Not the kind of invisibility that comes with age or frailty. No, this is something sharper. A chosen blindness. A household deciding you're no longer worth seeing unless they need something done. For weeks, months if I'm being honest, that ache had been growing in me. But it was in the days that followed that dinner that it began to pulse, throbbing in ways I could no longer ignore. The disrespect wasn't sudden. It had crept in like rot behind wallpaper, silent, persistent, always spreading. You only see it when the surface finally buckles. And that week, the surface buckled. The first sign came the morning after the kitchen incident. My son left early without a word. My daughter-in-law avoided eye contact, busying herself with tasks that didn't need doing, just so she wouldn't have to acknowledge my presence. The grandkids whispered around corners, like I was a ghost they were scared to anger. At first, I thought the silence might be a kind of peace. It wasn't. It was the silence you hear in a home where affection has dried up. I tried to make myself small, helpful even. Not to win them back, but to avoid more conflict. Old men don't have the energy for daily fights. We prefer our battles to be chosen carefully, and our victories to be quiet. But disrespect doesn't shrink when you give it space. It grows bold. One afternoon, I walked into the living room to find my granddaughter rummaging through the small drawer where I kept my personal things. My reading glasses, my old watch, a photograph of my wife holding my son as a newborn. "What are you doing there, sweetheart?" I asked gently. She didn't even jump. She wasn't caught doing something wrong. She believed it was her right. "Mom said I can use your old phone charger," she said, one leg bouncing impatiently. "My drawer is for my belongings," I answered softly. "You should ask before you go through it." She shrugged, unimpressed. "Mom said you don't mind. You're always forgetting things anyway." There it was again, that quiet sting. Not the accusation itself, but the blunt certainty that followed it. Forgetful, helpless, harmless. The invisible man in his corner of the house. "It's still polite to ask," I told her, but my voice didn't carry the way it used to. Even I could hear it. She left with the charger without another word. I stood there a long moment, staring at the open drawer, at my wife's smiling face, captured in a time when this house had been filled with warmth, with gratitude, with respect. I wondered what she'd say if she saw this now. I could almost hear her voice telling me, "You let people treat you the way you tell them you deserve. Speak up." But I couldn't, not yet. Not until I understood the full shape of the storm growing around me. The second sign came 2 days later, in the form of a medical form left casually on the kitchen counter. I recognized it from a distance, the school's annual update sheet for emergency contacts. I didn't pry, but something tugged at me, a kind of instinct I had long relied on, a voice deep within that said, "Look carefully, you'll find truth in the margins." So I did. My name wasn't listed, not even as a backup, not even as the man who had once left work early, covered in mud and sweat, to take my son to emergency care after he broke his arm falling from a tree I told him not to climb. I stared at the blank space where I once belonged, and for the first time, I wasn't angry. I wasn't even sad. I was numb. Because what do you do when your own blood decides you no longer exist in moments that matter? I placed the paper back exactly as I'd found it. Later that night, when my son and daughter-in-law reviewed it together at the dining table, I heard her whisper, "He's too old to be responsible for anything critical. You know that." My son didn't disagree, didn't defend me, didn't even hesitate. Just a soft murmur. "You're probably right." Probably right. A lifetime of fatherhood shrunk to 2 words. The third sign broke something in me. I had been sweeping the hallway when I heard their argument, sharp, bitter, frantic. "You said he'd pay the extra utilities," my daughter-in-law hissed. "You said he'll help with the grocery costs." "I thought he would," my son snapped. "He always does." "He hasn't in weeks." Weeks. So my absence had been noticed, but only in the places where my wallet had once filled the gaps. "Get him to contribute," she said. "You're his son. That's your job." My job. I leaned on the broom, heart steady but heavy. To her, I wasn't a father. I wasn't a grandfather. I was a line in a budget, a source of labor, a convenience, something useful until it wasn't, something expected to serve, not to live. That night, I sat in my room, notebook open to a clean page, the same one I had hesitated to use for months. My handwriting shook a little as I wrote, "How they treat me when I am no longer useful reveals who they are." Below it, I added, "and who I will no longer be for them." Then I documented everything. Dates, comments, actions, moments that stung more than they should have. Not out of pettiness, but clarity, a ledger of disrespect, a father's record of the ways love had been replaced with expectation, and a quiet promise forming beneath every line. One day soon, they will see exactly what they lost. The house went on as usual, but I was no longer part of usual. I had stepped into a space just outside their world, watching from the edges with a clarity age had sharpened, not dulled. They thought I was fading. They thought I was harmless. They thought I was nothing but a pair of old hands meant for chores. But in those quiet days, I felt something inside me change. I was no longer breaking, I was preparing. It's remarkable how a single evening, one meal, one careless insult can unravel years of quiet endurance. But the truth is, the dinner itself wasn't the cause. It was the final straw on a pile built slowly, painfully over time. And that pile didn't fall gently. It crumbled hard enough to echo through the rest of the week. That night replayed itself in my head like an old film reel. The scraping forks, the ignored greetings, the way they devoured the food I had cooked without acknowledging it. The way my daughter-in-law dropped the dishes into the sink as though I were a hired hand. But it wasn't until days later, on a Thursday of all things, that the memory began to rot into something darker. Because on Thursday, I tried to cook again, and Thursday reminded me I wasn't welcome at my own stove. The house was unusually quiet that morning. Everyone left early. My daughter-in-law to some fitness class she pretended was necessary for her mental health. My son to a job he hated but refused to admit was draining him. The kids to school with cereal crumbs still stuck to their shirts. By late afternoon, the house was empty, a rare, peaceful kind of empty. So I decided to try again. I set a pot of water on the stove, pulled out ingredients slowly, letting each movement soothe me. Chopping onions, cracking garlic, slicing potatoes. Movements my hands remembered even when my heart felt heavy. As the stove warmed, so did I. Cooking was the last thing that made me feel connected to my wife, to my past, to the version of myself that existed before I became the burden. But as I reached for the pot, I froze. The stove was cold. I fiddled with the knob, nothing. I checked the breaker, fine. I crouched down, not easy for old knees, and saw the truth. The gas valve was shut off, manually, tightened, deliberate. No child had done this, no accident caused this. Someone in this house didn't want me cooking. Someone had decided the kitchen belonged to them alone. I stood there, holding the metal valve like it was the hand of a ghost. A familiar heat built behind my eyes. Not anger, not tears, but something harder to name. A feeling like betrayal wrapped in silence. I straightened slowly and walked to my room without another word. Later that evening, when everyone returned home, I listened from the hallway as my daughter-in-law laughed in the kitchen. "That therapist on TikTok said old people need structure," she joked. "Maybe Dad shouldn't be in the kitchen at all. It stresses him." My son chuckled, tired but amused. "He gets confused sometimes. It's safer." Safer, confused, the language of dismissal. I stepped into the doorway, holding myself steady. "I didn't forget to turn on the stove," I said quietly. My daughter-in-law jumped slightly, hand to her chest. "Oh, Dad, you startled me." She said it like I was the one intruding. My son shifted awkwardly. "We just mean you don't need to cook all the time. It's fine." "I enjoy cooking," I said. "It gives me purpose." She exchanged a look with him, a wordless look, a look that settled a decision between them without me. "You can help with something else," she said briskly. "Cooking should be simple. We don't have time for old-fashioned methods." I looked at the stove. She followed my gaze and smiled. Not kindly, not cruelly, just knowingly. Something inside me tightened. "Did you turn off the gas?" I asked. My son stiffened. My daughter-in-law placed a hand on her hip. "Of course, you almost left it on last time." "No," I corrected softly. "I didn't." She shrugged. "Well, better safe than sorry." The conversation ended there, because they walked away, because they always walked away from me. But that night, as I lay in bed staring up at the darkness, something became painfully clear. This was no longer my home. Not truly. I was a guest they tolerated, a helper with no boundaries, a shadow in the corner of photographs, a name slowly disappearing from forms, a responsibility they shuffled around like unwanted mail. My heart beat slow and heavy as I remembered the dinner again, the way she'd told me to do the dishes since I wasn't busy. How easily she had reduced me to that role. Not a father, not a grandfather, just old, excess, an extra pair of hands, something to be managed. But memory is a funny thing. It can wound you, or it can sharpen you. And as the humiliation of that night settled deeper in my bones, it began to transform into something else, something steadier, something that didn't shake or tremble. Resolve. Quiet, dangerous resolve. If they wanted a servant, they would lose a father. But I knew enough not to act on raw emotion. I would observe. I would listen. I would learn the depths of the disrespect that had taken root in this house. And then I would make my move. Slow, precise, like a man tightening a single screw on a machine until the whole thing finally reveals what's broken. The next morning, the household chaos resumed. Doors slammed, kids shouted. My daughter-in-law complained about needing more free time. My son muttered something about bills. No one noticed I wasn't in the kitchen. No one noticed I didn't start the pot of coffee. No one noticed I didn't fold the laundry that sat on the couch. No one noticed me at all. But I noticed them. Every word, every gesture, every careless assumption. I had begun to watch them the way a man watches a game he knows he can win, if only he waits for the right opening. And the opening, I suspected, was coming sooner than they knew. A man my age is often underestimated, not because he is weak, but because he has mastered the discipline of silence. People assume quiet means passive. They mistake observation for confusion. They think age dulls awareness, when in truth, it sharpens it, like a knife used often enough to know exactly where to cut. In the days that followed, I leaned into that silence, not out of surrender, out of strategy. Because every time they dismissed me, every time they spoke over me, every time they rolled their eyes when I moved too slowly, I learned something new about the cracks forming in this house. And what I learned disturbed me more than their disrespect. It told me why they needed me desperately, but refused to admit it. It began with the mail. I wasn't trying to snoop, but when a man is the first to wake and the last to sleep, he sees things others don't. One morning as I walked past the entry table, I noticed a stack of envelopes shoved halfway under a candle. Red ink bled through one of them like an open wound. Past due, final notice. My stomach tightened. It wasn't addressed to me. It wasn't even addressed to both of them. It was addressed solely to my son. The company name on the envelope was the utility provider for the house, electric, gas, water bundled together. I turned the envelope slightly, careful not to open it. The date it had been issued was weeks ago. Weeks! Hadn't anyone seen it? A few letters below it had similar warnings. A credit card statement, insurance, something from the bank. My heart began to beat a little faster, not from fear, but from clarity. For the first time in a long while, something in this home made sense. Their short tempers, their arguments behind closed doors, the way they looked at me like I was the problem, when the real problem was quietly eating through their finances like termites in the foundation. I stepped away before they woke up, before anyone could accuse me of meddling. But once you notice one crack, you start seeing all of them. A few days later, I overheard them at night. I had gotten up to use the bathroom, moving quietly through the hallway. Their door was open just enough for their voices to slip through like smoke. "We can't afford another month like this," my daughter-in-law snapped. Her voice wasn't raised. It was hushed, frantic. My son whispered back, "I'm trying. I asked for more hours. They're cutting shifts, not adding." "Well, then find something else. We can't keep living like this. We're drowning." A pause, then a trembling exhale. "I told you Dad could help," my son murmured. Ah, there it was. A sentence sharp enough to cut. Not Dad shouldn't have to help. Not Dad has done enough. Just, he could. He should. He would. Of course he would. More footsteps. Someone sitting on the bed. "He's not contributing anymore," she hissed. "He barely even tries to be helpful. He's acting entitled." Entitled. The word hit me square in the chest. I heard sheets wrestle before my son spoke again, defeated. "I'll talk to him." I stood there, frozen in the hallway's dim glow. Talk to me. Not ask me, not respect me, not appreciate me. Talk to me like a bank. Talk to me like a resource. Talk to me like a tool. When I returned to my room, I didn't feel angry, not in the usual sense. It was something colder, something more focused. I sat on my bed, reached into the drawer beside me, and pulled out the notebook I had started days earlier. I turned to a fresh page, and I wrote, "They need me financially, but they resent needing me." Below it, another line, "People are cruelest to the ones they depend on but refuse to respect." Then, as if guided by memory rather than intention, I flipped through my old folders, papers I'd carried with me when I moved in. Documents my daughter-in-law assumed were sentimental, not practical. She had no idea what lay inside them. Investment accounts, savings bonds, pension adjustments, tax records, property documents. The truth was simple. They had no idea what I still owned, and I had no intention of telling them. Not yet, not until I understood the full scope of their situation. A day later, I found the next piece of the puzzle. It came in the form of an envelope addressed to me from the county assessor's office. I sat at the kitchen table early that morning as I opened it, hands steady, heart bracing for something I couldn't yet name. Inside was a summary of the property arrangement from years ago, back when my wife was alive. Back when she and I helped my son purchase this house because he and his wife couldn't afford the down payment. Back when we believed family meant something. The arrangement hadn't changed, not legally. We never transferred the entire ownership. We never removed my name. We never relinquished rights to the property. Half of this house still belonged to me. Half the structure, half the land, half the mortgage obligations, secured by my signature alone. My breath left me in a slow exhale. My daughter-in-law didn't know. My son had conveniently forgotten. And now their finances were crumbling underneath them. For the first time in weeks, a small bitter smile tugged at my mouth. Not from spite, from understanding the leverage I possessed. That afternoon, my son approached me. He hovered in the doorway like a boy caught between guilt and obligation. "Dad," he started, rubbing the back of his neck, "do you think you could help us out a little? Just for a few months. Things are tight." There was no mention of the insults, no apology for the stove, no acknowledgement of the dinner they had devoured without gratitude, no recognition of the ways they had pushed me to the edges of their lives. Just a quiet expectation. "Help us, because you always do." I looked at him, really looked at him. The tired eyes, the slumped posture, the desperation hiding behind the casual tone. I loved him. God help me, I still loved him. But love without respect is a form of self-erasure, and I was done erasing myself. I closed the notebook gently and placed it on my lap. "What exactly do you need help with?" I asked, though I already knew. He sighed. "Bills, groceries, maybe the mortgage if you can swing it." The mortgage, the absurdity almost made me laugh. He had no idea, but I didn't reveal anything. Not yet. Not until the full truth finished revealing itself. I nodded slowly. "Let me look into things," I said. He smiled a relieved, shallow smile and patted my shoulder before walking away. And in that moment, watching him leave with the confidence that I would bail him out as always, something solidified inside me. A decision, a turning point, a quiet vow. I would help, just not the way he expected. I would save them, just not from their bills. I would teach them something far more valuable and far more painful: respect, and the cost of forgetting it. I've heard people say that when an old man reflects on his past, he does it out of loneliness. They think nostalgia is a symptom of a life winding down. But that isn't true. Memories aren't an escape. They're reminders, anchors, clues. And in the days after my son asked me to help with the mortgage, my memories became a map guiding me toward the decision I hadn't yet spoken aloud. I remembered who I was before this house began to shrink me. And remembering that man changed everything. I wasn't always the quiet figure lingering in hallways and retreating into my room like an old dog afraid of being scolded. I had a life once, one with purpose, sweat, and a rhythm that kept me going even when my back screamed for mercy. I was a builder, not a metaphorical one, a literal one. My hands shaped beams, foundations, staircases, cabinets. I understood how to read a blueprint better than some men could read their own feelings. My wife used to say I built trust the same way I built homes, slow, steady, and impossible to tear down. But trust can be eroded by neglect just as easily as plaster by water. The problem wasn't that my family saw me as old. The problem was they saw me as only old, and they had no idea what age had taught me. When my wife got sick near the end, I made promises to care for our son, to be gentle even when hurting, to stay close so the grandchildren would know my face. She had worried about leaving me alone. She never imagined that loneliness could exist even in a house full of people. After her passing, I stayed strong, for months, years even. My son invited me to live here until I got back on my feet. But grief doesn't knock a man down financially. It knocks him down emotionally, spiritually. It gut punches him in places no one else can see. I moved in thinking it was temporary, but grief has a way of making people accept arrangements they shouldn't. And slowly, the house that was supposed to help me heal became the place where I faded. But I hadn't vanished completely, not yet, because despite what they believed, I still had more power than they could fathom. A few days after the mortgage conversation, I set out on foot, walked all the way to town despite the limp in my left leg that flared whenever the weather shifted. My son offered to drive me. I told him I preferred to walk. He didn't push. In truth, I needed the walk. The cold air in my lungs, the rhythm of my cane tapping the pavement, the solitude that came from moving without someone watching or rushing me. I went to see an old friend, Richard Halden, my attorney, my confidant, one of the last people alive who remembered me as something more than a grandfather with a soft voice. His office smelled like old books and new paper, the kind of smell that tells you your secrets are safe. He rose when I entered, shook my hand firmly, none of that gentle squeezing people use when they think your bones will snap from a real handshake. "I figured you'd come sooner or later," he said, studying me with perceptive eyes. "You look tired." "Tired of being treated like I'm done," I admitted. "I need clarity." "What kind?" he asked, lowering himself into his leather chair. "The kind that tells me exactly what I own," I replied, "and what rights I still have in that house." He didn't blink. He simply pulled out a file. My file. My wife's handwriting still marked the corner of one of the pages, a note she'd written years ago during one of our meetings. Seeing it nearly undid me, but I swallowed and focused. Richard reviewed the documents with efficient precision. Then he leaned back. "You still have half the property," he confirmed, "legally, financially, structurally." I exhaled slowly. "And the mortgage?" I asked. "Your son can't refinance without your consent," he said. Then he paused. "And technically, you could force a sale at any time. Force a sale of the house they were struggling to keep. A house I had partly paid for. A house my wife had designed touches for. A house in which I now washed their dirty dishes while they told me I wasn't busy." "What about eviction?" I asked. His eyebrows lifted slightly, not in shock, but in approval. "You can't be removed," he said simply, "not unless you sign away your rights." We sat in silence for a long moment. Finally, he asked the question I had been avoiding. "What are you planning to do?" I stared at the documents, at my wife's handwriting, at my own name beside my son's. "I'm planning," I said slowly, "to let them feel the weight of what they've forgotten." Richard nodded like he understood, because he did. I didn't want revenge. I wanted recognition. I wanted respect. I wanted, after years of giving, to stop being treated like something disposable. "I don't want to destroy their lives," I said quietly. "No," he agreed. You want them to understand yours. Yes, that was it, precisely. When I returned home that evening, the house was a storm. Literal chaos. The kids were fighting. My daughter-in-law was on the phone yelling at someone. My son was pacing with a bill in his hand. They didn't even look at me when I walked in, not at first. But when my son finally saw me, his relief was immediate. "Oh, good, Dad, we need—" I raised my hand gently, and for the first time in years, he fell quiet at my gesture. I didn't speak, not yet. I needed time, space, a plan that wasn't being shaped by emotion alone. Instead, I walked past them into my room, their voices ricocheting behind me like hail against a window. Not once did any of them ask where I'd been. Not once did they wonder why I looked more resolved than usual. Not once did they consider that the very ground beneath their feet, the house they believed they owned, rested on signatures they had forgotten about. But they would learn, soon, because something had shifted inside me. I was done being the ghost who washed their dishes, and I was ready to become the man who reminded them whose house they truly lived in. There's a moment, right before a family finally fractures, when the air becomes strangely still. A heaviness settles into the walls, into the floorboards, into the smallest corners of a home. You can feel it even when nothing dramatic is happening, especially then. The week after my visit to the attorney, that stillness began creeping into every room. I could feel a breaking point approaching, and I knew it would come from them, not me. Despite everything I now knew, despite the quiet leverage tucked safely into my drawer in the form of legal documents and property agreements, I didn't act right away. No, I waited. Because sometimes the most powerful thing a man can do is allow others the space to reveal exactly who they are. And they did, more quickly and more cruelly than even I expected. The breaking point arrived on a Sunday afternoon. It was supposed to be a simple family gathering. My son's boss and his wife were coming over. Good, decent people whom my daughter-in-law was desperate to impress. She spent all morning barking orders like a drill sergeant. Clean this, hide that, move this, don't leave that lying around. Dad, please don't touch anything, she snapped as she passed me for the third time. Just stay out of the way. Stay out of the way. Like furniture, like clutter, like an inconvenience she wished she could stash in the attic. My son didn't correct her. He didn't even flinch. I retreated to my room quietly, as I had learned to do, and closed the door. But halfway through the afternoon, the door swung open without a knock. It was her. "Dad, we need the guest room for their coats," she said briskly. "Could you move your things to the garage just for today?" The garage? My belongings? In the garage? For coats? I blinked at her, unsure I'd heard correctly. "I beg your pardon?" She sighed dramatically. "Your room is a mess, Dad. I can't have them seeing it. Just put your things in boxes and we'll move them back later." My jaw tightened. "My things are not going in the garage," I said, maintaining what calm I could. "Dad," she repeated, impatience sharpening her tone, "this is important, for us. You always say you want to help, so help." Before I could answer, my son stepped behind her. He didn't look angry or uncomfortable. He looked resolved, as though they had discussed this without me. "Dad," he said, "it's just for tonight. Just for tonight. Just like washing the dishes because I wasn't busy. Just like not cooking for safety. Just like removing me from emergency contact forms for convenience. Just another erosion. Another piece of me chipped away." "No," I said again, voice like iron wrapped in cloth. "My room stays as it is." My daughter-in-law's eyebrows shot up. "Why are you making this difficult?" she hissed. "They're important people." "And I'm not?" I asked. Her mouth twisted. "Dad, stop," my son whispered. "Please don't do this today." "Do what exactly? Exist? Claim the smallest corner of a home I owned half of?" I looked between the two of them. The humiliation they were trying to pass off as common sense, the entitlement wrapped in polite phrasing, the expectation that I would fold, as always, because folding was easier than conflict. But something in me had hardened days earlier. No, I repeated, stepping past them. I will not be moved like a piece of furniture. The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut. My daughter-in-law recovered first. "Fine," she snapped. "Then stay in your room for the rest of the evening. Do not come out when they're here. I mean it, Dad. Please, don't embarrass us." Embarrass them? I was now something they needed to hide. She closed the door firmly, sealing me off. And for a long moment, I simply stood there, staring at the wood grain, my breath steady, my pulse calm in that dangerous way storms can be calm. I sat on my bed, letting the sound of their preparations drift faintly through the walls, vacuuming, rearranging furniture, the forced cheeriness in her laugh as she practiced her greeting. And I realized something important. This wasn't a breaking point they created for me. It was one they created for themselves. When the guests arrived, I stayed in my room, as requested. I heard the door open, their excited greetings, the clinking of glasses, the offer of appetizers, the deliberate omission of any mention of me. A ghost couldn't have been more absent. But ghosts don't have leverage, and ghosts don't make choices that shift the ground beneath a family. "No," I repeated.
The ghosts don't have leverage, and ghosts don't make choices that shift the ground beneath a family.
As I sat there, a soft knock came at my door. I thought it might be my son, ready to apologize. It was the youngest granddaughter. She slipped inside quietly and sat next to me. "Grandpa," she whispered, "Mom says you're being difficult. Are you?" The innocence in her eyes didn't sting. It wounded. "No," I told her gently. "I'm just standing up for myself." She swung her feet. "Why? Did someone hurt you?" I smiled, but not with my heart. "People don't have to hit you to hurt you," I said softly. "Sometimes they just forget who you are." She leaned her head against my arm. I closed my eyes. Her presence kept my anger from turning bitter. It reminded me why I hadn't left already, why I didn't want to burn every bridge. Children don't choose the lessons their parents teach them. They just observe, absorb, repeat. I didn't want them repeating this. At least one of them still saw me, still cared, still asked. I stroked her hair gently, but a thought lingered beneath the tenderness, cold and certain. This was the last time I would sit invisible in a house I partly owned. This was the last time I would be told to hide. This was the last time they would assume my silence meant submission. A storm was coming, but it would not start with shouting, nor with revenge, nor with anger. It would begin, as most real storms do, with a quiet shift in the air. And when it hit them, they would finally understand. You cannot mistreat the foundation of a home and expect the house to remain standing. When families unravel, it never happens in one dramatic crash. It happens in murmurs, in glances, in inconveniences that spark larger frustrations. But every collapse has a moment, the precise second when everyone realizes something is missing, something essential, something they assumed would always be there. That moment came for my family the morning they discovered my room was empty. Not empty of furniture, not empty of belongings, just empty of me. I hadn't packed much, just what I needed. Clothes, documents, my notebook, a few photos of my wife, creases worn deep from the times I traced her smile with my thumb. I left the rest, a lifetime of things, meaningless now. I left before sunrise, stepping through the front door with the same quiet step they rarely heard. The house seemed to sigh as I closed the door behind me, like it knew change had finally come. I didn't leave a dramatic note, no accusations, no anger, no explanation. Just a simple line, written with steady hands and a clear mind. I need peace. Do not contact me until I am ready. I placed it on the kitchen table. the same table where they had eaten the meal I cooked without waiting for me. The same table they left dirty while they told me to clean it since I wasn't busy. A fitting place for the note. And then I left. Walking away felt like lifting a weight I didn't know I had been carrying. My spine straightened. My breath came easier. Even the morning air felt kinder. But I knew that peace wouldn't last, not once they realized what my absence meant. It started with confusion. Around mid-morning, when everyone woke up, I imagined it clearly. The house always followed the same pattern. My daughter-in-law entering the kitchen first, expecting coffee already brewing. My son stumbling in, rubbing sleep from his eyes, expecting his lunch packed for work. The grandkids asking, "Where's Grandpa?" because they needed something from me. Except this time, nothing was prepared. No coffee, no lunches, no Grandpa. And then they saw the note. I wasn't there to witness their reactions, but their voices carried through the walls of memory easily enough. They weren't difficult to imagine. Where did he go? He can't just leave. What about the bills? What about today's appointment? What about the kids? What about them? Always about them. Never, what have we done? But reality has a way of forcing people to ask the questions they avoid, and soon enough, reality came knocking. Their panic began with small inconveniences. My daughter-in-law couldn't find the insurance information she needed. It was in my drawer. My son couldn't locate the garage key. I always kept it in my pocket. The kids were late because I wasn't there to get them ready. Minor things, but when a family depends on someone they disrespect, the absence becomes glaring. By noon, panic had turned into fear. A letter arrived from the electric company, then another from the bank, then a call from the school about updated emergency contacts. Without me in the picture, everything suddenly fell back onto them. But the largest blow came later that afternoon, when the mail brought an envelope from my attorney's office, a formal one. My son called my name out of habit before opening it, only to realize I wasn't there. When he did open it, I can imagine the color draining from his face. Inside was a request, a mandatory meeting to discuss property rights and shared ownership, the official reminder that I still owned half the house they thought was theirs alone, the house they believed they controlled, the house they tried to move me out of, just for coats. My daughter-in-law would have lost whatever composure she had left. "He can't do this," she would shout. "He can't just leave and then threaten us." But I hadn't threatened anyone. I had simply stopped being the man who absorbed everything quietly. And that alone was enough to shake their world. By evening, their panic bled into desperation. They called me, then texted, then called again, then tried calling mutual friends, neighbors, anyone who might know where I was. But I had anticipated this. My phone was turned off. My location was not shared. My attorney was under strict instructions to provide no details. And the house, my house, suddenly felt smaller to them than it ever had to me. I imagined my son pacing, pulling at his hair, the weight of bills pressing down, the mortgage looming, his wife's accusations ringing in his ears, all while the children asked, "When is Grandpa coming home?" Home. The irony wasn't lost on me. They only realized I was home when I wasn't there anymore. As for me, I spent that evening sitting on the small porch of my second property, a little house on the edge of town. Quiet place, surrounded by oaks. The kind of place where birdsong replaces arguments and peace arrives without needing to be earned. I sat there with a cup of tea, letting the golden hour wash over me, warming the creases time had etched into my face. The air smelled like grass and wood and old memories of better days. And for the first time in years, I felt something soft settle onto my shoulders. Freedom. Not spite, not anger, not vengeance, just freedom. But I knew this wasn't the end. The storm wasn't finished. It was only gathering itself, circling back toward the people who had taken me for granted. They would learn that the quiet man they dismissed held the power they needed. And soon they would face me, not as the servant they mistook me for, but as the man they never truly understood. And the reckoning was already on their doorstep. There's a strange calm that settles over a man when he knows he holds the truth and the power that comes with it. The kind of calm that doesn't tremble or brag. It simply waits, patiently, unbothered, while the world around him panics. That's the calm I felt the day my family finally found me. Not because they figured out where I was, but because they were forced to meet me, by law. Richard, my attorney, had arranged everything. He told them in polite, neutral legal language that my attendance at the meeting was voluntary, but theirs was not. The property dispute couldn't proceed without them present. The word dispute must have twisted in my daughter-in-law's stomach like a knife. She liked control. She liked her version of order. She liked her house exactly the way it was, hers. Except it wasn't, and now she had to face that truth. When they arrived at the attorney's office, I was already seated inside. A glass window separated the waiting area from the conference room, so I saw the exact moment they spotted me. My son froze mid-step. My daughter-in-law stiffened, turning pale, then red. The kids looked confused, then worried. Their eyes darted between their parents and me, like they were witnessing the opening scene of a tragedy they hadn't rehearsed for. My son entered first. "Dad," he breathed. Relief and panic tangled in that single syllable. "We've been looking everywhere for you." I didn't respond immediately. I let the silence fill the space between us, heavy as wet rope. Not to punish him, not to be dramatic, but to force him, for once, to feel the weight I'd been carrying. He continued, words tumbling out. "You scared us. You shouldn't just disappear. We need to talk." My daughter-in-law stepped in, her tone brittle. "We didn't deserve this, you know. Leaving without a word, that was cruel." Cruel. The word hit with the quiet irony of a dull blade. I looked up at her. "For years," I said, my voice calm and even, "I've been disappearing in this house one small piece at a time. You just never noticed until it inconvenienced you." She blinked, taken aback. My son opened his mouth to intervene, but before he could, Richard gestured them toward their seats. "Let's begin," he said. They sat across from me, a family used to being in control, suddenly very aware they weren't. Richard began with the facts, cold, neutral, paper-bound truth. "As outlined in the original agreement," he said, tapping a folder, "this property is jointly owned. 50% belonged to Mr. Harper's late wife, and upon her passing, her share transferred to him." My daughter-in-law flinched. My son swallowed. Richard continued. "Mr. Harper has allowed your family to live in the home rent-free for several years. He has also contributed financially to utilities, groceries, and childcare." He turned a page. "Recently, Mr. Harper requested clarification on his rights, responsibilities, and potential legal avenues if he chooses to alter the current arrangement." Alter the arrangement. My daughter-in-law broke. "Why?" she burst out. "Why would you do this to us? We're family." Her voice trembled not with sadness, but fear. Fear of losing her stability. Fear of facing consequences. Fear of realizing the old man she dismissed had been holding her world together. My son reached for her hand, more out of reflex than affection. "Dad, please," he said, "we're under a lot of stress. You leaving made everything worse. The bills, the house, we didn't know." "I know," I interrupted softly. They both looked at me, startled by the calm in my tone. "I know about the debts, the overdue notices, the mortgage. I know you're struggling. I know life has been hard on you." Their eyes widened. My daughter-in-law's mouth tightened. My son whispered, "Dad, we didn't want to burden you." A pause. A long, painful pause. Then I said the words they weren't prepared for. "You burdened me long before money was the issue." They went still, utterly still. "You burdened me," I continued, "with disrespect, with assumptions, with dismissal, with the belief that I should serve you simply because I lived in the same house." My son's breath hitched. For the first time, he couldn't look at me. "You told me I should be grateful to be there," I said quietly, "yet half that home belongs to me." My daughter-in-law finally broke. "We didn't mean." You meant every word, I said, not angrily, but with simple, undeniable truth. Her mouth closed. We have choices before us, I said, and so do you. I opened my notebook, slowly, deliberately. I will not return to the house as things stand. I will not be spoken to like a burden. I will not be hidden from guests. I will not told to move my belongings to the garage. I will not cook, clean, or play caretaker as a condition of respect. They stared at me like they were seeing a stranger, or perhaps like they were finally seeing me at all. You may buy out my share of the property. If you cannot, then the house will be sold. My daughter-in-law gasped. You can't. I can, I said, and I will. My son whispered, voice cracking, Dad, please, we'll lose everything. I leaned forward just slightly. You lost me first. Silence pressed down on the room like a weight. Even the attorney didn't speak. We can rebuild, I said, not unkindly, but only if you see me as a man, not a servant, a father, not an obligation, a human, not a tool. My son's eyes filled with tears he refused to let fall. My daughter-in-law shook with a mixture of regret and disbelief. And for the first time in years, I felt tall, not physically, spiritually. Finally aligned with the man I had once been. Finally refusing to shrink. Finally choosing myself. As the meeting ended, they stood slowly, dazed. My son approached me hesitantly. Dad, he whispered, voice hoarse, I'm sorry. I didn't realize how far things had gone. I didn't realize what we were doing to you. I placed a hand on his shoulder. I know you didn't, I said, but it happened all the same. My daughter-in-law didn't speak. She couldn't. Her face said everything. Realization, shame, fear, and something else. Humility she had never shown me before. And as they left the room, heads bowed, shoulders heavy, I knew the story wasn't over. But for the first time, I was no longer the one carrying it alone. I've heard people say that life rarely gives neat endings, that wounds don't close cleanly, and families don't heal without leaving a scar. There's truth in that, but scars are not signs of weakness. They're proof of healing, proof something did hurt you, but it didn't finish you. As I sat on the porch of my little second home, the one they never knew existed until the storm forced them to face me, I thought about that. The scar forming over the years of disrespect, the long stretch of quiet endurance, the slow erosion of a man who once stood tall in his own household. But I was standing again, not in anger, in clarity, and clarity has a way of rewriting the ending. The day after the meeting, I received a message, not from my son, not from my daughter-in-law, but from my youngest granddaughter. A simple text, Grandpa, can I visit you? I miss you. Children have a way of seeing through adult messes. They notice what matters. They understand love without needing it explained. I told her yes. When she arrived later that afternoon, she ran straight into my arms. No hesitation, no careful apology crafted by adult mouths. Just a child who wanted her grandfather back. Grandpa, she said into my shirt, Mom and Dad are scared. They're fighting a lot. They keep saying they ruined everything. I stroked her hair gently. They didn't ruin everything, I murmured. Some things can't be ruined, only repaired. She pulled back, studying me with big, searching eyes. Will you come home? The question settled in the space between us, warm and heavy. Home, a word that had changed meaning gradually, painfully, until it now sat 50 miles behind me in a house I no longer recognized. I lifted her chin with my hand. I will always be somewhere you can come to, I said, but I don't live there anymore. She nodded slowly. Children understand truth better than adults. They don't complicate it with pride. We spent the afternoon together, baking biscuits like I used to do with her father when he was small. She talked about school, about her favorite teacher, about the boy who annoyed her at recess, about how she didn't like the yelling at home. And then, carefully, she asked, Is it our fault you left? My breath caught. I knelt so I was eye level with her. "No, sweetheart," I said firmly. "Adults make choices. Adults create problems. You just live among them. None of this is your fault." Her small shoulders relaxed. When she left, she hugged me so tight I felt the echo of my wife's arms wrapped behind her. After she was gone, I stood on the porch long after the sun had begun to set, feeling both heavier and lighter than I had in years. 2 days later, my son arrived, alone. No wife, no children, no rehearsed speeches. Just him. He stood at my doorway with a face carved by exhaustion and regret. "Dad," he said, voice unsteady, "can I come in?" I stepped aside. He sat across from me, elbows on his knees, hands clasped in the way he used to sit as a teenager when he'd broken something and didn't know how to confess it. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I'm sorry for everything." He listed it all, not to earn forgiveness, but because he needed to say it out loud. How he let his frustration turn into neglect. How he let his wife's resentment shape his own behavior. How he ignored the small signs that he was losing me piece by piece. "I should have protected you," he said, voice cracking. "You protected us your whole life, and we repaid you with disrespect." Tears didn't suit my son. They aged him, softened him, revealed the boy he once was. "We didn't realize how much you did," he whispered, "until you weren't there." There it was, the simple truth. Absence is sometimes the only way to teach presence. "You don't deserve to carry everything alone," I said gently. "You never did. But you also don't have the right to place everything on me." He nodded, shame and understanding intertwined. "We'll sell the house," he said. "We can't afford to buy you out, not now. Maybe not ever." He exhaled shakily. "She's moving back with her sister for a while," he added, "to think, to figure herself out." I said nothing. Some things don't require commentary. Then he said the thing I didn't expect. "Dad, can we still see you, even if you don't come back? I don't want to lose you." I leaned back, studying the man my son had become. Flawed, tired, uncertain, but trying. Trying matters. "I won't disappear," I said, "but I won't live like I did. I won't be taken for granted. I won't be your crutch. I'll be your father. Only that." He nodded, eyes wet. "That's more than enough," he whispered. And in that moment, something inside both of us healed, imperfectly, but honestly. The house sold quicker than any of us expected. My son moved into a smaller place he could afford. My granddaughter visited often. The older grandkids slowly softened. My daughter-in-law remained distant, but even she sent a long letter one day, full of apologies, self-reflection, and shame. I read it. I accepted it. I didn't respond. Forgiveness isn't something to be rushed. Some roots must regrow on their own. As for me, I stayed in my little home near the oaks. I planted tomatoes. I repaired a fence long overdue for mending. I cooked meals for myself, not because anyone expected it, but because I enjoyed it again. Peace returned to me like an old friend. One evening, as I cooked dinner, potatoes sizzling, garlic filling the room with its warm embrace, I smiled at the memory of the night my family ate the meal I had cooked, then told me to do the dishes because I wasn't busy. They didn't know then who they were speaking to, not fully, not truly, but they know now. I sat down, plate in hand, steam rising like soft ghosts of the past. And for the first time in a long time, I whispered to the empty room, "I am busy, busy living my life." The house held the sound, warm and approving. A quiet justice served at last.